The rain fell like bullets on the cobblestones of Naples, each drop exploding against the pavement in tiny bursts of cold. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows behind Panificio Rosa, the bakery that threw out yesterday's bread every Thursday night at 9. My fingers were numb, my second-hand coat soaked through, and my stomach, empty for the second day in a row, had stopped growling hours ago. I was already 20 minutes late for the collection, which meant the good loaves would be gone. "Merda," I whispered, pulling my collar up against the wind that whipped down the alley, carrying the smell of gasoline and rotting garbage. I'd been in this exact spot every Thursday for 3 months, ever since I'd aged out of Santa Maria Orphanage and the city had spit me onto the streets like an unwanted seed. 18 years old, no family, no papers that mattered. Just a name that meant nothing and a face that disappeared into crowds. But tonight felt different. The usual sounds were wrong. No distant laughter from the trattoria on the corner, no scooters buzzing past, no old women calling down from their windows. Just rain. And underneath it, something else. A sound that didn't belong. I froze, my hand halfway to the bakery's waste bin. There it was again. Faint, barely audible over the storm, but unmistakable. A baby crying. My chest tightened. Babies didn't cry alone in the backstreets of Naples at night, not unless something had gone very, very wrong. "Keep walking," I told myself. "Not your problem. You don't get involved." That had become my specialty lately, keeping my head down, blending in, becoming invisible to the world around me. Involvement meant questions. Questions meant authorities. Authorities meant deportation, or worse. But the cry came again, weaker this time. Desperate. My feet moved before my mind could stop them. I followed the sound through the rain, past shuttered shops and graffitied walls, my heart pounding against my ribs. The alley opened onto a wider street, and that's when I saw it. A black Mercedes, parked at an angle against the curb. Even in the rain, even in the dark, I could see the bullet holes that spider-webbed across the windows like deadly constellations. The back door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. And on the ground, half covered by the car's shadow, was a bundle of white fabric. The crying came from inside it. My blood turned to ice. Around me, people hurried past with umbrellas and turned-up collars, their eyes deliberately averted. An old man crossed himself and quickened his pace. A woman pulled her daughter closer and whispered something sharp. No one stopped. No one even slowed. I caught fragments of whispers as people passed. Esposito's car. Saw it on the news. Don't look. Don't get involved. Esposito. Even I, who'd only been on the streets for 2 years, knew that name. Everyone in Naples knew it. Everyone who worked at the docks. Everyone who whispered. In the markets, everyone who read the newspapers knew about the Esposito family. They didn't just own restaurants and shipping companies. They owned fear itself. Their name was spoken in the same breath as words like vendetta and omerta and disappearances that were never investigated. The baby's cry grew weaker, fading into a whimper that cut through me like glass. I looked at the bullet-riddled car, at the white bundle on the wet pavement, at the crowds flowing around it like water around a stone, pretending blindness. My hands were shaking. Every survival instinct I'd honed over 2 years screamed at me to walk away. Whatever had happened here, an ambush, a hit, a war between families, it wasn't my business. Getting involved with the Mafia meant death, or worse. The rain drummed harder. Thunder rolled overhead like a warning from God himself. But that sound, that tiny fading cry, it reminded me of something I'd tried to forget. the sound of my own voice years ago, crying in a hallway while adults walked past. The feeling of being small and helpless and completely, utterly alone. "If no one helps her," I whispered to the rain, to the city, to whatever saint might still be listening, "she'll die." My feet moved. 3 steps. 5. 10. I knelt beside the bundle, my knees hitting the cold, wet pavement. Up close, I could see the fabric was expensive. Pure white cashmere, embroidered with a golden letter E in elaborate script. The kind of blanket that cost more than I'd earned in my entire life. With trembling fingers, I pulled back the edge. A baby, maybe 6 months old. Pale skin tinged blue from the cold, dark hair plastered to her tiny skull, lips trembling with each weakening breath. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were dark and unfocused, but still searching, still hoping someone would answer her cry. "Madonna Santa," I breathed. Headlights cut through the rain behind me. A car engine rumbled, growing closer, the sound of tires on wet pavement like a predator's growl. I didn't think. I scooped the baby into my arms, so light, so cold, like holding a dying bird, and ran. My shoes slapped against wet pavement, splashed through puddles, slid on cobblestones slick with rain and oil. The baby made a soft sound against my chest, barely a whimper now, her small body trembling. Behind me, car doors slammed. Voices shouted, angry, urgent, male, but I didn't look back. I ran through the maze of Naples's old quarter, past shuttered shops and sleeping windows, the baby clutched against my chest like stolen salvation. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. Thunder rolled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder, converging on the street I'd just fled. The hospital was 12 blocks away. I'd never run so fast in my life. Water streamed down my face, rain and sweat and tears I couldn't afford to acknowledge. The baby's breathing was so shallow now, so faint, that I pressed her closer, trying to share whatever warmth my own shivering body could offer. "Stay with me," I gasped as I ran. "Per favore, piccola. Stay with me." Neon signs blurred past. My vision tunneled. The world narrowed to just 3 things: the weight in my arms, the hospital's distant lights, and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I didn't know if the men had followed me. I didn't know if the police would arrest me for touching the baby. I didn't know anything except that this child, this stranger, this daughter of criminals and violence, deserved to live. And maybe, in saving her, I could prove to myself that someone like me, homeless, paperless, worthless in the eyes of the city, could still matter. The emergency room doors of Ospedale San Marco finally appeared through the sheets of rain, glowing like a beacon. I burst through them, stumbling, gasping, the baby limp and cold in my arms. Fluorescent lights blazed after the darkness of the streets, making me squint. Water pooled around my feet, rain and sweat and maybe tears. I couldn't tell any more. "Aiuto!" I gasped, my voice breaking. "Per favore! Help her! She's not breathing right!" The nurse at the intake desk looked up sharply, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock as she took in the scene. Me, soaking wet, clothes tattered and dripping, holding an infant wrapped in an expensive blanket embroidered with a golden E. Her face went white. "Dio mio," she whispered, stumbling to her feet. Is that? "She needs help," I cried, thrusting the baby toward her. "Please, she's so cold. I found her in the street. She's—" The nurse didn't take the baby. Instead, she backed away, her eyes wide with something that looked like terror. "Esposito's mark," she breathed, staring at the embroidered E as if it might burn her. "That's Esposito's baby." And just like that, I understood that the second act of my life had begun, though I wouldn't understand the cost of that moment until much later, when it was far too late to run. Subscribe, if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow's story unfolds darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than you think. Now, let's begin the tale. The hospital erupted into chaos. Within seconds, 3 more nurses appeared from behind swinging doors, their faces tight with fear. A doctor in blue scrubs stopped mid-stride in the hallway, his eyes locking onto the golden E embroidered on the white cashmere blanket. "Get Dr. Lombardi!" one of the nurses hissed to another. "Now!" I stood in the center of the intake area, water still dripping from my clothes, the baby growing colder in my arms with each passing second. "Why isn't anyone helping her?" My voice cracked. "She's dying." The first nurse, her name tag read Julia, wrung her hands, stepping forward but not close enough to touch the child. "You don't understand what you've brought here." "I brought a baby who needs medical attention." My arms tightened protectively around the infant. Her breathing had become so shallow I could barely feel it against my chest. "That's not just any baby," another nurse whispered, backing toward the wall. "That's Augusta Esposito." The name hung in the air like a curse. I'd heard the whispers on the streets, seen the headlines in newspapers left in cafe trash bins. The Esposito family. The ambush 2 hours ago in the Quartiere Spagnoli. Multiple casualties. The Don's wife and infant daughter, missing, presumed dead. Except the daughter wasn't dead. She was here, in my arms, barely breathing. "I don't care whose baby she is," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my legs. "She's a child, and if you don't help her right now, you'll watch her die while you stand there being afraid." The words cut through the paralysis. Nurse Julia's jaw tightened. She glanced at her colleagues, then back at the baby, and something shifted in her expression. Professional duty overtaking fear. She stepped forward, arms outstretched. "Give her to me." My arms didn't want to let go. For 12 blocks, this child had been my responsibility, my purpose. But I forced myself to release her small, cold body into the nurse's capable hands. "Pediatric emergency bay now," Julia shouted, already moving. "I need warmers, oxygen, and someone page Dr. Lombardi again. Tell him it's critical." The hospital transformed into a whirlwind of motion. Doctors and nurses converged. The baby disappeared behind a set of double doors, and I was left standing in a spreading puddle of rainwater, suddenly empty-armed and shaking. My knees buckled. I caught myself against the intake desk, breathing hard, the adrenaline that had carried me through the streets finally draining away. My wet clothes clung to my skin. My fingers were so numb I couldn't feel them anymore. "Miss?" A young nurse appeared at my elbow, her voice cautious. "You should sit down. You look like you're going to faint." I let myself be guided to a plastic chair in the corner. Someone draped a thin hospital blanket over my shoulders. Someone else pressed a cup of hot water into my hands, though I couldn't stop trembling long enough to drink it. Time became strange and elastic. Minutes felt like hours. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. People moved past me, some staring, some deliberately not looking. I heard whispered conversations, phones ringing, the squeak of shoes on linoleum, and then different sounds. Heavy footsteps in the corridor, the hushed, urgent tone of voices that carried authority. The intake nurse standing up straighter, fear flickering across her face again. "He's here," someone whispered. I looked up. The police arrived first. 2 officers in uniform, hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the emergency room with professional suspicion. Behind them came men in dark suits, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of private security, not public service. And then, framed in the doorway like a figure from a Renaissance painting, he appeared. Fabiano Esposito. I'd never seen him before, only heard his name spoken in fearful whispers, but I knew him instantly. It was impossible not to. He commanded space the way cathedrals commanded reverence, simply by existing. Late 30s, tall and lean in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from Carrara marble. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, lips pressed into a hard line. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Dark and infinite, they swept the room with the kind of intelligence that missed nothing and forgave less. The emergency room went silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim in his presence. He moved through the space with unhurried certainty, the sea of people parting instinctively. The officers nodded deferentially. The suited men flanked him like shadows. And then his gaze found the double doors where they'd taken his daughter, and something flickered across his face. Too quick to name, too raw to be anything but real. "Where is she?" His voice was low, controlled, but underneath it I heard the edge of something dangerous. Dr. Lombardi appeared through the doors, still wearing surgical gloves. "Mr. Esposito, your daughter is stable. Hypothermic, dehydrated, but alive. We're warming her now. I want to see her." "Of course. But first—" The doctor hesitated, then gestured toward me. "The young woman who brought her in, she saved Augusta's life." For the first time, Fabiano Esposito's gaze shifted to me. It felt like being seen by God, if God were cold, calculating, and capable of ending my existence with a single word. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The wet hospital blanket around my shoulders suddenly felt like a shroud. He crossed the distance between us in 4 strides, his security detail moving with him. Up close, he was even more imposing, taller, broader, radiating a kind of controlled violence that made every cell in my body scream, "Danger! You!" His eyes swept over me, the soaked second-hand coat, the threadbare clothes, the worn shoes, taking inventory, cataloging everything I was and wasn't. "You found my daughter." It wasn't a question. My throat was dry. Yes, sir." "Where?" "Via Toledo, near the old pharmacy. She was on the ground, by the car." The words tumbled out. No one would help her. Everyone just walked past, and she was crying, and Why didn't you walk away like everyone else?" The question hung between us, identical to the one I'd asked myself 1,000 times in the past hour. I met his eyes. Those dark, dangerous eyes that had probably watched men die without flinching, and told him the truth. Because she was crying. Silence. Something shifted in Fabiano Esposito's expression. Not softening. Men like him didn't soften, but a recalibration, as if he'd expected one answer and received something entirely different. He studied me for a long moment, and I felt stripped bare under that gaze, like he could see every hungry night, every cold morning, every moment of fear and desperation that had led me to this exact point. Then, without breaking eye contact, he spoke to someone behind him. "Get her name. Everything about her." One of the police officers stepped forward, reaching for my arm. "Miss, you'll need to come with us for questioning." "No." The single word from Esposito stopped the officer mid-reach. "No one touches her." His gaze never left my face. She carried my daughter through the rain when Naples turned its back. Her life is under my protection now." He gave a subtle gesture. Within moments, the officers stepped back, their aggression evaporating like steam. My protection? What did that even mean? Esposito leaned closer, his voice dropping to a register only I could hear. "You saved my blood. That creates a debt." His eyes searched mine, looking for something I didn't understand. And debts, in my world, are never forgotten. Then he straightened and walked toward the double doors, his entourage following like a dark tide. I sat frozen in my plastic chair, the thin blanket clutched in my trembling hands, understanding with sudden terrible clarity that saving Augusta Esposito hadn't been an act of mercy. It had been the moment my old life ended and something far more dangerous began. I sat in that plastic chair for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall insisted only 40 minutes had passed. The thin hospital blanket did nothing against the cold that had settled into my bones. My clothes were still damp, clinging to my skin in uncomfortable patches. Every few minutes, I shivered so violently my teeth chattered. But I couldn't leave. Not until I knew she was okay. Not until I knew that tiny girl with the dark eyes had survived the night I'd pulled her from. Nurses moved past me with practiced efficiency, their earlier panic replaced by careful neutrality. No one made eye contact anymore. It was as if Esposito's declaration, "Her life is under my protection now," had turned me into something dangerous to acknowledge. I pulled the blanket tighter and tried not to think about what protection from a man like Fabiano Esposito actually meant. The double doors swung open. A different doctor emerged. Older, gray-haired, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that caught the fluorescent light. He scanned the waiting area, found me, and crossed the space with measured steps. "Miss Pinto." His voice was kind but cautious. I straightened. "Yes. Is the baby okay?" "Augusta is stable. Her core temperature is rising, and her breathing has normalized. You got her here just in time." He paused, studying me with clinical curiosity. Another 10 minutes in that cold, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Relief crashed through me so powerfully I had to brace myself against the chair. "Thank God. Mr. Esposito asked that you be informed." The doctor glanced toward the double doors. "He also requested you remain here until he's ready to speak with you." Requested. As if I had a choice. "How long will that be?" The doctor's expression turned sympathetic. "I couldn't say. He's with his daughter now." After the doctor left, I tried to stand, but my legs weren't cooperating. The adrenaline had fully drained away, leaving behind exhaustion so complete I could barely keep my eyes open. A young nurse, the same one who'd given me the blanket earlier, appeared with a small paper bag. "There's dry scrubs inside," she whispered, "and some bread from the cafeteria. You look like you need it." My throat tightened. "Thank you." She nodded quickly and hurried away before anyone could see her kindness. I changed in a bathroom that smelled of disinfectant and fear, pulling on the oversized blue scrubs that hung off my frame like a child playing dress-up. My own clothes I left in a wet pile in the corner. They weren't worth saving anyway. The bread was stale but still warm. I ate it standing over the sink, trying not to cry at the simple mercy of it. When I returned to the waiting area, the atmosphere had changed again. More men in suits had arrived, stationed at intervals throughout the hallway like silent sentries. Their eyes tracked every movement, every person who passed. The police were gone, dismissed or frightened off, I couldn't tell which. This wasn't a hospital anymore. It was Esposito's territory. I reclaimed my plastic chair and waited, and waited. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m. The night shift nurses changed over, whispering to each other as they glanced my way. I caught fragments. The girl who found her doesn't look like much. Wonder what he'll do with her. I wondered the same thing. At 1:47 a.m., the double doors opened and Fabiano Esposito emerged. He'd removed his suit jacket. His white shirt was rolled to his elbows, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he looked almost human. Almost. The exhaustion around his eyes didn't soften the sharp intelligence in them, and the way he moved, controlled, purposeful, still radiated danger. His gaze found me immediately. I stood on instinct, the hospital blanket falling from my shoulders. He crossed the waiting room in that same unhurried stride, and once again I was struck by how much space he consumed just by existing. The suited men shifted position, creating a perimeter around us without being told. "She's sleeping," he said without preamble. "The doctors say she'll make a full recovery." "I'm glad." The words came out smaller than I intended. His eyes swept over me, taking in the oversized scrubs, the bare feet, the way I was barely standing. "You changed." My clothes were wet. "Where are you staying?" The question caught me off guard. Nowhere. I mean, I have places. Under the overpass near... You're homeless." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." Something flickered in his expression. Not pity. Men like him didn't do pity, but calculation. As if he were solving an equation I didn't know existed. "You have no family," he continued. "No employment, no identification papers. You aged out of Santa Maria 2 years ago and have been surviving on charity and theft ever since." My blood ran cold. "How do you—" "I know everything, Miss Pinto." He said it matter-of-factly, as if omniscience were simply another tool in his arsenal. "Within 20 minutes of learning your name, I knew where you were born, where you grew up, how many times you've been picked up by police for vagrancy, and which cafes let you clean in exchange for food." I took an involuntary step back. "You had me investigated?" "I investigate everyone who enters my world." His gaze held mine. "And you, whether you intended to or not, entered it the moment you picked up my daughter." The weight of those words settled over me like a shroud. "I didn't mean to—" I started. "Intent is irrelevant." He moved closer, and I caught the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Cigar smoke, maybe, or gunpowder. "What matters is that you did something no one else in this city would do. You risked your life for a child you didn't know, connected to a family everyone fears." "She was just a baby," I whispered. "Just a baby," he repeated, and for the first time, something almost like emotion crept into his voice. "My daughter, my blood, the only thing in this world that matters to me." He studied me for another long moment, and I felt dissected under that gaze, every weakness and fear laid bare. "I told you earlier that you saved my blood, and that creates a debt." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "In my world, debts are paid. Always." "I don't want anything. That's irrelevant too." He pulled something from his pocket, a business card, cream-colored and expensive. He pressed it into my hand. "Tomorrow morning, a car will come to wherever you choose to wait. It will bring you to my home." "Why?" "Because you're not sleeping on the streets anymore, Oliveira." The way he said my name, slowly, precisely, made it sound like a vow. "Because my daughter is alive because of you, and I protect what's mine." "I'm not yours," I said, with more courage than I felt. His smile was sharp and humorless. "Aren't you?" Then he turned and walked back through the double doors, leaving me standing in the fluorescent light with a business card burning in my palm and the terrible understanding that I'd just been claimed by the devil himself. I didn't sleep that night. The hospital let me stay in the waiting room. Or rather, no one dared tell me to leave after Esposito's declaration. I curled up on Shia, 3 plastic chairs pushed together, the thin blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and stared at the ceiling tiles until dawn crept through the windows. The business card sat in my palm like a burning coal. Esposito Holdings, Villa Carmela, Via Posillipo. An address that meant nothing to me except that Via Posillipo was where the wealthy lived, the old money, the untouchables, the people who look down on Naples from their cliff-top palaces. I could run, take whatever mercy the night had given me and disappear into the city's endless sprawl. Change my name again, find a new corner to sleep in, a new cafe to clean. But Esposito's words echoed in my head. "I know everything, Miss Pinto." If he could find out my entire history in 20 minutes, I doubted I could hide for 20 hours. At 7 a.m., a nurse brought me espresso in a paper cup and a cornetto wrapped in wax paper. She didn't speak, just set them on the chair beside me and left. I ate slowly, trying to make it last, knowing it might be the last kindness I received. At 8:30, my decision was made for me. A black car pulled up to the hospital entrance. Not the bullet-riddled Mercedes from last night, but a sleek sedan that gleamed like polished obsidian. The driver, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a face carved from granite, stepped out and scanned the waiting area. His eyes found me. "Miss Pinto." Not a question. "I'm Marco. Mr. Esposito sent me." I stood on shaking legs, still wearing the hospital scrubs, still barefoot. I didn't say I'd come. Nevertheless, he gestured toward the car with the patient inevitability of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Please." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet carried me forward, through the hospital doors, into the morning sunlight that felt too bright after the fluorescent prison of the waiting room. Marco opened the rear door. The interior smelled of leather and wealth. I hesitated at the threshold. "Miss Pinto," Marco said quietly, "Mr. Esposito doesn't make idle offers. If he says you're under his protection, you are, whether you come willingly or not." The threat was delivered so politely it took me a moment to recognize it as one. I got in the car. Naples transformed as we drove. The narrow, chaotic streets of the old quarter gave way to wider avenues lined with palm trees. The buildings grew taller, cleaner, their facades painted in soft yellows and corals. We climbed higher, away from the bay, until the city spread below us like a postcard. I'd never seen Naples from above before. From street level, it was all grime and desperation. From up here, it looked almost beautiful. "First time on Posillipo?" Marco asked, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "Yes. It's a different world up here." His tone suggested that wasn't entirely a good thing. The road narrowed, winding between high stone walls crowned with bougainvillea. Through iron gates, I caught glimpses of villas, sprawling, elegant, dripping with old money, each one more magnificent than the last. Then Marco turned through a set of gates that opened automatically, and my breath caught. Villa Carmela rose before me like something from a dream. 3 stories of butter-yellow stone, with arched windows and wrought-iron balconies overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. Gardens cascaded down the hillside in terraces of oleander and lemon trees. A fountain burbled in the circular drive, topped with a marble statue of a woman holding a child. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It was also a cage. I could feel it in my bones. Marco parked and opened my door. "This way, please." I stepped onto gravel that crunched under my bare feet, acutely aware of how I must look. Unwashed, wearing hospital scrubs, standing before a palace like a beggar at the gates. The front door opened before we reached it. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, dressed in a simple black dress with her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. Her face was kind but weathered, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. "So you're the girl," she said in a voice warm as honey, "the one who saved La Piccola." I nodded, unable to find words. "I'm Rosa. I manage the household." She looked me up and down, not with judgment, but with the practical assessment of someone solving a problem. "Come. You need a bath, proper clothes, and food. In that order." "Where's—" I started. "Mr. Esposito is with Augusta," Rosa said, already ushering me inside. "He hasn't left her side since they brought her home 2 hours ago." The interior of Villa Carmela was even more breathtaking than the exterior. Marble floors reflected light from crystal chandeliers. Frescoed ceilings soared overhead. Fresh flowers perfumed the air. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that required an army of servants. I felt like a stain on all that perfection. Rosa led me up a sweeping staircase, down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men and elegant women, and into a bedroom that was larger than any place I'd ever slept in my life. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in white linens. French doors opened onto a balcony with a view of the sea. A vase of fresh roses sat on an antique dresser. "The bathroom is through there," Rosa said, pointing to a door. "I'll bring clothes while you wash. Take your time." "Why are you being kind to me?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Rosa paused in the doorway, her expression softening. "Because Mr. Esposito told us what you did. And because anyone brave enough or foolish enough to pick up that baby deserves at least one moment of comfort before—" She trailed off. "Before what?" "Before you understand what it means to be under Fabiano Esposito's protection." She said it gently, almost apologetically. "This house has rules, child. And the most important one is this. Once you enter his world, you don't leave. It." She closed the door softly behind her. I stood alone in that beautiful room, surrounded by luxury I'd never imagined, and felt the walls closing in. The bathroom was all white marble and gold fixtures. I ran the water as hot as it would go and stepped into the shower, watching 2 years of street grime swirl down the drain. By the time I emerged, clean for the first time in recent memory, wrapped in a towel softer than clouds, Rosa had left clothes on the bed. Simple but expensive. Fitted black pants, a cream silk blouse, undergarments still in their packaging. Everything fit perfectly. Of course it did. "I know everything, Miss Pinto." I dressed slowly, catching my reflection in the mirror. The girl staring back looked almost unfamiliar. Clean, clothed in silk, standing in a room fit for royalty, but beneath the costume, I was still the same. Homeless, powerless, trapped. A soft knock at the door made me jump. "Miss Pinto?" Rosa's voice. "Mr. Esposito will see you now." My hands trembled as I smoothed the silk blouse. This was it. The moment I'd learn the true price of saving Augusta Esposito's life. I opened the door and followed Rosa down the hallway, toward whatever fate awaited me in the devil's beautiful house. Rosa led me through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, each one more opulent than the last. Paintings line the walls, some modern, some clearly centuries old, all worth more than I could fathom. Our footsteps echoed on the marble floors despite Rosa's soft-soled shoes and my bare feet. I'd asked for shoes, but Rosa had simply smiled and said, "Mr. Esposito prefers you comfortable." I suspected it was more about ensuring I couldn't run. We climbed a narrower staircase to the 3rd floor, where the atmosphere changed. The hallway here was quieter, painted in soft creams and whites. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the sea, and there, in the silence, I heard it. The soft murmur of a man's voice, speaking Italian so gently it was almost a lullaby. Rosa stopped before a door left slightly ajar. She knocked once, softly. "Avanti," came Esposito's voice. She pushed the door open, gestured for me to enter, and disappeared down the hallway before I could protest. I stepped into a nursery. It was a room designed for dreams. Walls painted with soft clouds and birds, a white crib draped in sheer fabric, shelves lined with toys that had probably never been touched. The morning light made everything glow as if touched by magic. And in a chair by the window, holding Augusta against his chest, sat Fabiano Esposito. He'd changed since last night. Gone was the tailored suit, replaced by simple black pants and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it too many times. But it was his face that stopped me. The hard edges had softened into something I hadn't expected to see. Grief. Pure, unguarded grief. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment our eyes met. Then he glanced back down at Augusta, his hand supporting her tiny head with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man with his reputation. "Come here," he said quietly. My feet carried me forward until I stood a few feet from the chair. Up close, I could see Augusta properly for the first time since the hospital. Clean now, dressed in a soft pink outfit, her dark hair fine as silk against her scalp. Her eyes were closed, her tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. She looked nothing like the dying infant I'd pulled from the rain. "She's beautiful," I whispered. "She looks like her mother." Esposito's voice carried a weight that made my chest ache. He gestured to the wall beside the window. "There." I turned. A portrait hung there, large and luminous, in an ornate gold frame. A woman in her late 20s, seated in a garden with sunlight catching in her auburn hair. She had the kind of beauty that painters spent lifetimes trying to capture, classical, serene, with eyes that held both warmth and sadness. And in her arms, a newborn wrapped in white lace. "Valentina," Esposito said. "My wife. That was painted 2 weeks after Augusta was born." "Was." Past tense. "I'm sorry," I said, because what else could I say? "She died 2 months later. Suddenly." He stroked Augusta's head absently, his eyes distant. "Everyone said it was complications from the birth. Postpartum complications that the doctors missed." The way he said it made it clear he didn't believe that. "But it wasn't," I said softly. His gaze snapped to mine, sharp and assessing. "You're perceptive. You wouldn't look like that if you believed it was natural causes." Something almost like approval flickered across his face. He stood carefully, cradling Augusta as if she were made of glass, and crossed to the crib. He laid her down with a tenderness that made him seem almost human, adjusting the blanket around her, his fingers lingering on her small hand. When he straightened, the mask was back, controlled, dangerous, unreadable. "Poison," he said simply. "Traces were found during the autopsy. The same compound that killed 3 of my men during the ambush last week. The same ambush that was supposed to kill Augusta, too. My blood ran cold. Someone inside, someone close enough to access Valentina's medication, close enough to know her routines, close enough to be trusted. His jaw tightened. Someone in this house. I took an involuntary step back. Then why bring me here? You don't know me. I could be... You're not. He said it with absolute certainty. I've had you investigated thoroughly, Miss Pinto. You have no connections to my enemies, no criminal history beyond petty theft and vagrancy. You're nobody. Forgive the bluntness, which makes you the safest person in this villa. Safe for what? He moved toward the window, gazing out at the sea. I need someone I can trust near Augusta. Someone who isn't part of the families, the business, the web of alliances and betrayals that defines my world. He turned back to me. Someone who's already proven they'd risk their life for her without expecting anything in return. Understanding crashed over me. You want me to be her nanny. I want you to keep her alive. I don't know anything about caring for babies. You knew enough to save her life in the rain. His eyes held mine. And unlike everyone else in this house, you have no reason to want her dead. I looked at the crib, at that tiny, peaceful face, then at the portrait of Valentina, beautiful and doomed, then at Esposito, this man who commanded fear throughout Naples, now standing in a nursery designed for a child who'd lost her mother and nearly lost her life. If I say no, I asked, you won't. You're that certain? You didn't walk away from her when she was dying on the street. You won't walk away from her now. He moved closer, his presence filling the space between us. I'm offering you safety, shelter, purpose. A room in this house, food, clothing, protection from a world that's been cruel to you since you were discarded from that orphanage. In exchange for what? My freedom? In exchange for doing what you've already proven you're willing to do, caring for an innocent child. He paused. And yes, your freedom. But tell me, Oliveira, what freedom did you have sleeping under bridges? The question hit harder than I wanted to admit. There's something else you should know, he continued, his voice dropping lower. The ambush that killed Valentina, the men who tried to take Augusta, they're still out there, and they know she survived. The moment they confirm she's alive, they'll come for her again. Then why not hide her somewhere safer than a house with a traitor? Because I'm not hiding. His eyes turned cold, predatory. I'm hunting, and I need Augusta safe while I find the person who poisoned my wife and tried to murder my daughter. He crossed to a side table, returning with a photograph. He placed it in my hands. The image showed the same black Mercedes I'd found in the rain, but taken before the bullets. Valentina sat in the back seat, radiant and smiling, holding infant Augusta. The photo was dated 3 weeks before her death. This is what they took from me, Esposito said quietly. This is what you saved. I stared at the photograph, at the ghost of a happy family destroyed by poison and bullets. If I do this, I said slowly, I need to know you'll tell me the truth. About the danger, about what's happening in this house. Agreed. And I can leave when this is over, when you find whoever did this. His smile was thin. If you still want to leave by then, yes. The way he said it suggested he already knew I wouldn't. I looked at Augusta one more time, peaceful, innocent, unaware that her existence was a battleground. Then I'll do it, I whispered. I'll keep her safe. Esposito nodded once, satisfied. Rosa will show you to the nursery quarters. You'll stay in the adjoining room. Don't leave this floor without informing my security. Don't trust anyone except Rosa, and even then, trust carefully." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Oliveira?" "Yes?" "Thank you." The words sounded foreign in his mouth, as if he rarely had occasion to speak them. For saving her. For staying. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with a sleeping baby and the growing certainty that I'd just agreed to something far more dangerous than I understood. I moved to the window and looked out at the beautiful, glittering sea. A golden cage was still a cage, but at least this time I wasn't alone in it. The nursery became my entire world. For 3 days, I barely left the 3rd floor. Rosa brought meals on silver trays, more food than I'd seen in months, let alone eaten. She showed me how to prepare Augusta's bottles, how to support her head properly, how to read the subtle differences between her cries. "This one means she's hungry," Rosa explained, rocking the fussing infant. "This one means her stomach hurts. And this one—" Augusta let out a sharp wail. "This one means she's just angry at the world. Like her father." I learned quickly. I had to. Every time I held Augusta, I felt the weight of Esposito's words. Keep her alive. The adjoining room Rosa had mentioned turned out to be larger than my entire corner of the orphanage had been. A real bed with clean sheets, a wardrobe filled with clothes that actually fit me, simple, practical, but nicer than anything I'd ever owned. A window overlooking the gardens where I could watch the sea change colors with the light. It should have felt like paradise. Instead, it felt like waiting for an axe to fall. Esposito visited twice a day, morning and evening, appearing silently in the nursery doorway like a well-dressed ghost. He never stayed long. Just long enough to hold Augusta, to murmur to her in Italian too soft for me to hear, to watch her with eyes that held more emotion than I'd thought him capable of. He never spoke to me during those visits. It was as if I were furniture, necessary, but not worth acknowledging. I told myself I preferred it that way. On the 4th morning, Rosa arrived with breakfast and a warning. "Mr. Esposito's lieutenant is coming today," she said, setting down a tray of fresh fruit and pastries. "Rico Salvetti. He's been with the family for 15 years. Very loyal." The way she said, "very loyal," made me look up from where I was burping Augusta. "You don't sound convinced." Rosa's hand stilled on the tray. For a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "I've worked in this house since Mr. Esposito's father was alive. I've seen men come and go, alliances form and break. And I've learned that the most dangerous people are the ones who smile the widest." She straightened, her voice returning to normal. "Rico smiles very wide, Bambina. Remember that." Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone. I met Rico Salvetti that afternoon. I was in the nursery, singing softly to Augusta, a lullaby I half remembered from childhood, when I heard voices in the hallway. Male voices, one of them Esposito's, the other unfamiliar but oily smooth. "Still can't believe she survived, a capo. It's a miracle." "Miracles had nothing to do with it." Esposito's voice was colder. "Someone found her and brought her to the hospital." "Yes, I heard about that. Some street girl, they said." The door opened. Esposito entered first, his expression unreadable. Behind him came a man in his early 40s, handsome in a slick way, with perfectly styled dark hair and a suit that screamed expensive taste. His smile was wide and white and didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes landed on me, and I felt assessed, categorized, and dismissed in an instant. "Rico," Esposito said, "this is Oliveira Pinto. She'll be caring for Augusta." The famous rescuer. Rico's smile widened as he approached, hand extended. A pleasure, Miss Pinto. I shifted Augusta to one arm and shook his hand reluctantly. His grip was firm, his palm slightly damp. Mr. Salvetti, I said. Please, Rico. He peered at Augusta with an expression I couldn't quite read. She looks well. Better than I expected after such an ordeal. Children are resilient, Esposito said, taking Augusta from my arms with practiced ease. The baby settled against his chest immediately, her tiny hand gripping his shirt. Indeed. Rico's eyes followed the movement. And you trust this girl to care for her? No offense, Miss Pinto, but you're quite young, inexperienced. She's proven herself capable, Esposito said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. But I caught something in Rico's expression, a flash of annoyance, quickly masked by that wide smile. Of course, Capo. Your judgment is always sound. He pulled out his phone, glancing at the screen. I should check on the security arrangements for tomorrow's meeting. With your permission? Esposito nodded, and Rico left with one last smile in my direction that made my skin crawl. After he was gone, I found my voice. What meeting? Business associates from Rome. Esposito laid Augusta back in her crib, his movements gentle despite his imposing size. Nothing that concerns you. Everything that brings strangers to this house concerns me if I'm supposed to keep her safe. He turned, one eyebrow raised. You're learning quickly. Rosa's a good teacher. Rosa is wise. He moved toward the door, then paused. And she's right to warn you about Rico. So he'd heard, or known. With Esposito, it was hard to tell which. You don't trust him? I trust no one completely. But Rico has been with my family since before I inherited control. He fought beside my father, helped me consolidate power after the old man died. His jaw tightened. Loyalty that deep is rare, which is why I pray I'm wrong about him. Wrong about what? His eyes met mine, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Doubt. About whether he's the one who poisoned Valentina. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Rico's smile, the way his eyes had lingered on Augusta, the slight dampness of his palm. Rosa's warning echoed in my head. The most dangerous people are the ones who smile the widest. Around 2 a.m., Augusta woke crying. I lifted her from the crib, checking her diaper, offering a bottle, but she refused to settle. Sometimes babies just needed to be held, Rosa had said. So I walked her around the nursery, humming that half-remembered lullaby, watching the moonlight paint silver patterns on the floor. That's when I heard it. Voices. Low and urgent, coming from somewhere below my window. I moved to the glass, careful to stay in shadow. The window overlooked a side garden, secluded from the main terrace. 2 figures stood among the lemon trees, silhouettes in the darkness. One was tall and broad, unmistakably Esposito. The other was slighter, gesturing animatedly. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone, argument, anger, tension. Then the slighter figure moved into a shaft of moonlight, and I saw his face. Rico. His wide smile was gone. In its place was something ugly, fury barely contained, his hands clenched at his sides. Esposito said something sharp. Rico took a step closer, his posture aggressive. For a moment, I thought Rico might actually strike him. Then headlights swept across the garden, a car arriving at the front of the villa. Both men froze. Rico said something else, low and vicious, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Esposito remained standing alone among the lemon trees, his shoulders tight with tension. After a moment, He pulled out his phone. The screen's glow illuminated his face, and even from this distance, I could see his expression. He looked like a man expecting war. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding. Augusta had finally fallen asleep against my shoulder, blissfully unaware of the violence brewing in the house that was supposed to protect her. The most dangerous people are the ones who smile the widest. I thought about Rico's handshake, his oily charm, the way he'd looked at Augusta as if calculating her worth. And I thought about Esposito's words. I pray I'm wrong about him. But what if he wasn't wrong? What if the man who'd been loyal for 15 years, who'd fought beside Esposito's father, who smiled so wide and knew every corner of this house, what if he was the traitor? I laid Augusta back in her crib with trembling hands. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would tell Esposito what I'd seen. But tomorrow came too late. Because when I woke at dawn to Augusta's crying, I found her crib moved 6 inches from where I'd left it. And on the windowsill, where there'd been nothing the night before, sat a single white lily, the flower of death. Someone had been in the nursery while I slept. Someone had stood over Augusta's crib. And I'd heard nothing at all. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stared at the white lily on the windowsill, its petals perfect and pristine in the early morning light. In Naples, white lilies meant only one thing: death. They were laid on graves, carried at funerals, sent as warnings to those marked for elimination. Someone had entered this room, my room, while I slept, had stood over Augusta's crib, had moved it, touched it, left this message like a promise, and I'd heard nothing. I snatched the lily from the windowsill and backed away from it as if it might bite. Augusta was still crying in her crib, her small face red and scrunched. I picked her up with trembling hands, holding her close, checking her frantically, her breathing, her color, her temperature. She was fine, hungry and annoyed, but fine. But she could have been so much worse. "Rosa!" My voice cracked as I shouted, "Rosa!" Within seconds, footsteps pounded up the stairs. The door burst open, and Rosa rushed in, her face pale with alarm. Behind her came 2 of Esposito's security men, hands already reaching for weapons. "What happened?" Rosa demanded. I thrust the lily toward her. "Someone was in here last night, while I was sleeping. They moved the crib and left this." Rosa's face went white as chalk. She took the flower with shaking hands, staring at it as if it were a serpent. "Madonna Santissima," she whispered. One of the security men, the older one I'd seen stationed in the hallways, moved immediately to the window, examining the sill and frame. The other began checking the room methodically, opening the wardrobe, looking under furniture. "The window's locked from the inside," the first man reported. "No signs of forced entry." "Then they came through the door," I said. "Someone who has access to this floor, someone who belongs here." The men exchanged glances but said nothing. "Where's Esposito?" I demanded. "In his study," Rosa said. "He's been there all night making calls to Rome. I'll get him." "No need." The voice came from the doorway. Esposito stood there, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But the moment he saw the lily in Rosa's hands, all trace of fatigue vanished. His face became stone. "Out," he said quietly to the security men. "Both of you, wait in the hall." They obeyed without question, closing the door behind them. Esposito crossed the room in 3 strides and took the lily from Rosa. He examined it with the careful attention of a man reading a threat in a foreign language, turning it slowly, his jaw muscles working. It wasn't here when I put Augusta to bed, I said, hating how my voice shook. I swear. I checked the room, locked the window. I would have seen it. I believe you. He set the lily on the dresser with deliberate care, as if it might explode. What time did you last check on her? 2:30. I got up because I heard. I stopped. His eyes snapped to mine. Heard what? Voices? In the garden below. I went to the window and saw you. And Rico. You were arguing. Something dangerous flickered across his face. What did you hear? Nothing specific. But Rico looked angry. Really angry. And then a car arrived and he left. I swallowed hard. After that, I went back to bed. I thought I'd tell you in the morning. And when did you sleep? Maybe 3:30. Augusta woke me at dawn, and that's when I noticed the crib had been moved. And the lily was there. Esposito turned to Rosa. Who was on duty on this floor last night? Rosa's hands twisted in her apron. Marco and Stefano, rotating shifts. Marco until midnight, then Stefano. Get them, now, and find Rico. I want him in my study in 10 minutes. Rosa fled. Alone with him, I finally let myself ask the question burning in my chest. It's him, isn't it? Rico. He's the one who... I don't know. Esposito moved to the window, his back to me. 15 years, Oliveira. He's been with me for 15 years. He held my father's hand when he died. He stood beside me at Valentina's funeral. He saved my life more times than I can count. And all of that means nothing if he's the one who poisoned your wife. I know. The words came out like broken glass. I know. He turned back to me, and I saw something I'd never expected to see in Fabiano Esposito's eyes. Helplessness. If it's him, he said quietly, if I'm right about this, then I've been blind. I've let a traitor into my inner circle, given him access to everything I love, trusted him with my daughter's life. His hands clenched into fists. And Valentina died because of my blindness. You can't know that. I should have known. His voice turned harsh. I should have seen it. But loyalty, real or performed, is the most valuable currency in my world. Without it, there is no family, no organization, no power. And Rico has played that currency perfectly. Augusta squirmed in my arms, making small complaining sounds. I adjusted her automatically, rocking slightly. So what do we do? I asked. Esposito's eyes focused on me with sudden intensity. We give him what he wants. What? Rico, or whoever planted that lily, wants Augusta. They want to finish what the ambush started. He moved closer, his voice dropping. So we let them think they can have her. Ice flooded my veins. Absolutely not. You can't use her as bait. She's already bait, Oliveira. The moment they discovered she survived, she became a target. At least this way, we control the situation. Control? Someone walked into this room last night while I was sleeping 10 feet away. How is that control? It wasn't meant to succeed. His eyes held mine. It was meant to terrify, to make us panic, make us move her somewhere they can access more easily, somewhere without witnesses. Then we don't move her. We lock this floor down, double the guards, and the traitor remains hidden, free to try again whenever the opportunity arises. He shook his head. No, we end this. Tonight. How? There's a shipment coming in at the old docks. Legitimate business, but it requires my presence. Rico knows about it. He helped arrange it. Esposito's expression turned calculating. I'll tell him I'm taking additional security, which means leaving the villa more lightly guarded than usual, and I'll let it slip that you'll be alone with Augusta for several hours. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. You want them to come here? While you're gone. I want them to think I'm gone. In reality, I'll be here watching. When they make their move, we'll have them. And if something goes wrong? My arms tightened around Augusta. If your trap fails and they get to her, that won't happen. You can't promise that. No. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. But I can promise that I'll kill anyone who tries to touch her, including Rico, if it comes to that. The words should have frightened me. Instead, they were almost comforting. When? I asked. Tonight. I'll leave at 8. You'll follow the usual routine. Dinner for Augusta, bath, bedtime. Act as if nothing is wrong. If someone comes, you scream. My men will be positioned throughout the house, out of sight. We'll have them within seconds. And if they hurt me before your men arrive? His jaw tightened. Then I'll make their death last considerably longer than seconds. It was the closest thing to reassurance a man like him could offer. The day passed with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions, feeding Augusta, changing her, playing with the soft toys Rosa brought. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Rosa knew something was happening. I could see it in the way she watched me, the way her hands trembled slightly when she delivered lunch. But she asked no questions. In this house, questions were dangerous. At 7 p.m., Esposito appeared in the nursery doorway, dressed for business in a dark suit and coat. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying clearly for anyone who might be listening, "I'll be at the docks until at least midnight. Call if you need anything, but the security team is reduced tonight. Most of them are coming with me." I nodded, playing my part. "We'll be fine." His eyes held mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Then he was gone. I heard his car start, heard the crunch of a gravel as it drove away, and then silence. I locked the nursery door and wedged a chair under the handle. I checked the window again, still locked. I picked up Augusta and held her close, breathing in her baby smell, trying to calm my racing heart. Somewhere in this house, a traitor was waiting, and soon they would make their move. 8:30, 9, 9:30. I watched the minutes crawl past on the nursery clock, each tick of the second hand loud as a gunshot in the silence. Augusta slept peacefully in her crib, one tiny fist curled near her cheek. I'd bathed her, fed her, sung every lullaby I could remember until she'd drifted off. Now she lay there, innocent and unaware, while I sat in the rocking chair beside her, straining to hear every sound in the house. Footsteps in distant corridors, the creak of old wood settling, the wind rustling through the lemon trees outside. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But my heart wouldn't slow down. At 10 p.m., I heard Rosa's footsteps on the stairs, her familiar, unhurried pace. She knocked softly. "Miss Pinto? I brought you tea." I moved the chair from the door and unlocked it. Rosa entered with a tray, her face composed but her eyes worried. "Any trouble?" she whispered. "Nothing yet." She set the tea on the side table. "Drink it. It'll help with your nerves." "I don't think anything could help with my nerves." Rosa's hand touched my shoulder briefly. "You're braver than you know, child. Not many would do what you're doing. I'm terrified." Brave and terrified aren't opposites. They're companions. She moved toward the door. "I'll be downstairs if you need me. Just scream." After she left, I locked the door again and returned to the chair. The tea sat untouched, growing cold. 10:30. 11. Maybe Esposito was wrong. Maybe the traitor wouldn't come tonight. Maybe... The lights went out. Every light in the nursery, every light in the hallway outside, plunging everything into sudden, complete darkness. My heart stopped. For 3 seconds, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the soft susurration of Augusta's sleep. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I shot out of the chair and grabbed Augusta from the crib. She woke with a startled cry, and I pressed her against my chest, my hand over her mouth to muffle the sound. Shh, Piccola, shh. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle turned slowly, tested the lock, found it secure. Then came a voice, smooth, familiar, poisonous. Miss Pinto. Rico. I know you're frightened, but I need you to open the door. My breath came in short gasps. I backed toward the window, Augusta squirming in my arms. The child isn't safe with Esposito, Rico continued, his voice reasonable, almost kind. Surely you've realized that by now. Everyone around him dies, his wife, his men, and soon his daughter, unless someone intervenes. Stay away from her, I managed to say. I'm trying to save her. And you. A pause. Open the door, Oliveira. Make this easy. Go to hell. His sigh carried through the wood. I gave you a chance. Silence. Then the sharp crack of splintering wood as something heavy slammed into the door. The frame groaned but held. Another impact. The wood around the lock began to split. I screamed, Esposito, he's here! Help! My voice echoed through the dark house. Augusta wailed in my arms, terrified by my terror. One more impact and the door burst open, the chair I'd wedged beneath it skittering across the floor. Rico stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by emergency lighting from the hallway. In his hand, a gun gleamed dully. That was foolish, he said, stepping inside. I pressed myself against the wall. Augusta clutched to my chest. Touch her and what? You'll fight me? He laughed, closing the distance between us. You're a homeless girl playing nanny. I'm a soldier. This ends one way. He raised the gun, pointing it not at me, but at Augusta. Give her to me, now. Or I put a bullet in both of you and tell Esposito I arrived too late to save you from an intruder. My mind raced. Esposito had said his men would be here within seconds, but seconds might be too long. Why? I asked, trying to buy time. Why kill her? She's just a baby. She's Esposito's heir, his weakness. As long as she lives, he'll never be ruthless enough to hold his empire. He'll hesitate, make mistakes, all for the love of a child. Rico's eyes glittered in the darkness. His enemies are willing to pay a fortune for her death, and I'm willing to collect. 15 years of loyalty, 15 years of servitude while he inherited everything. Power, wealth, respect. What did I get? Scraps from his table. His voice turned bitter. I earned this. I bled for this family, and now I'll be paid what I'm worth. He lunged forward. I twisted away, using the rocking chair as a barrier. Rico swore and grabbed for Augusta, his fingers brushing her blanket. That's when the window exploded inward. Glass shattered in a glittering cascade as a figure crashed through, rolling across the floor and coming up in a crouch between Rico and me. Esposito. Blood ran from a cut on his cheek where the glass had caught him, but his eyes were calm, cold, and absolutely lethal. Hello, Rico, he said quietly. Rico spun, raising his gun, but Esposito was faster. He caught Rico's wrist, twisted, and the gun clattered to the floor. They grappled in the darkness, a brutal dance of violence, fists, elbows, desperate fury. I ran for the door, Augusta screaming in my arms. The hallway was chaos. More security men pounded up the stairs. Lights flickered back on, harsh and blinding. Get her out! Esposito's voice roared from inside the nursery. Get them both out now! Marco appeared, his face grim. Miss Pinto, come with me! A gunshot cracked through the house. Time stopped. I spun back toward the nursery, my heart in my throat, Augusta's screams ringing in my ears. Another shot, then silence. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." Esposito appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, his shirt torn and bloodied. In his hand, Rico's gun. Behind him, on the nursery floor, Rico lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Esposito's eyes found mine. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "Is she?" I looked down at Augusta, checked her frantically. "No, she's fine, just scared." "Good." He lowered the gun, his hand shaking slightly, the only sign of emotion he allowed himself. "Marco, take them to my study. No one gets near them. No one. Si, capo." Marco ushered me down the hallway, away from the nursery, away from Rico's body. Behind us, I heard Esposito giving orders in a voice like ice. "Get him out of here! Clean the room! I want forensics on how he cut the power, and wake everyone on staff. If anyone else was involved in this, I want to know within the hour." We descended the stairs, Augusta still crying against my chest. My legs felt like water. My whole body trembled with adrenaline crash. Marco guided me into a wood-paneled study that smelled of leather and cigars. He settled me into a chair, brought water I couldn't drink, and positioned himself by the door like a sentinel. I sat there in the lamplight, rocking Augusta mechanically, watching her tiny face scrunch and relax as her crying subsided into hiccups. We were alive. Both of us alive. Because Esposito had crashed through a window to save us. Because his trap had worked, even though it had nearly failed. Because Rico was dead. 20 minutes later, Esposito entered the study. He'd changed his torn, bloody shirt for a clean one, washed the blood from his face. Only the cut on his cheek remained, a thin red line that would scar. He dismissed Marco with a gesture and closed the door. Then he crossed to where I sat and dropped to his knees in front of the chair. For a long moment, he just looked at Augusta, sleeping now, exhausted from terror. His hand reached out, trembling, and touched her tiny head with infinite gentleness. "I almost lost her," he whispered. "Again. But you didn't." My voice cracked. "You saved her. You saved us both." His eyes lifted to mine, and I saw something raw and unguarded in them. Grief, relief, fury, and something else I couldn't name. "You screamed for me," he said. "In the dark, when he had you cornered, you called my name. I knew you'd come. How? How could you possibly know that?" "Because," I said simply, "you love her, and love doesn't hide when the lights go out." His breath caught. For just a moment, the iron control he wore like armor cracked, and I saw the man beneath, a father who'd lost his wife, nearly lost his daughter twice, and was terrified of failing them again. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, "for protecting her, for trusting me. I think we protected each other." He stood abruptly, turning away, rebuilding his walls. "You should rest. Tomorrow we'll move you both to a more secure location while I clean house. Anyone else involved with Rico will be found. And then," he glanced back, "and then we begin again. Safer this time." He left without another word, but at the door, he paused. "Oliveira?" "Yes?" "From now on, you sleep in the room next to mine. I want you where I can hear you if you scream." Then he was gone. I sat alone in the study, holding a sleeping baby, understanding that everything had changed tonight. The golden cage had become something else. Something that felt almost like safety. Almost like home. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks since Rico's body had been carried out of the nursery. 3 weeks since Esposito's men had swept through the villa, interrogating staff, checking backgrounds, rooting out anyone with even the faintest connection to Rico's betrayal. 2 maids and a driver had been dismissed. Not guilty, Esposito said, but not trustworthy enough. In a world like his, suspicion was safer than mercy. True to his word, I'd been moved to a room adjoining Esposito's private suite on the 2nd floor. It was smaller than the nursery quarters, but infinitely more luxurious, with the same view of the sea and a door that connected directly to his bedroom. A door that remained locked from both sides. We'd settled into a strange rhythm, the 3 of us. Esposito had reduced his outside obligations, conducting most business from his study. He took breakfast with Augusta every morning, dinner with her every evening, and late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear his footsteps stop outside the nursery door, lingering there as if standing guard against ghosts. I should have felt safer. Instead, I felt something far more dangerous. I was beginning to feel like I belonged. It was Rosa who noticed first. "You smile at him now," she said one afternoon, watching me prepare Augusta's bottle while Esposito worked at the desk in the corner of the nursery, reading reports. "I do not," I protested, too quickly. Rosa's knowing look said everything. Maybe she was right. Maybe somewhere between the terror and the blood and the broken door, something had shifted. Esposito was no longer just the dangerous man who'd claimed ownership of my life. He was the father who held his daughter like she was made of starlight. The man who'd crashed through a window to save us. The person who asked every morning, "Did you sleep well?" As if my answer mattered. It was confusing, terrifying, and undeniably real. The night it happened, I couldn't sleep. It was past 2 a.m., and I'd been lying in bed for hours, listening to the sea whisper against the cliffs below. Augusta had been restless earlier, fighting sleep, and I'd finally gotten her down around midnight. But my mind refused to quiet. I pulled on a robe and padded barefoot into the hallway. The villa was silent, wrapped in that peculiar stillness that comes in the hours before dawn. Security lights cast long shadows. Somewhere below, I heard the faint murmur of voices, the night guards changing shifts. I moved toward the nursery, drawn by instinct, needing to check on Augusta one more time. The door was ajar. Lamplight spilled into the hallway, just the small nightlight we kept burning so Augusta wouldn't wake in total darkness. And there, in the rocking chair beside her crib, sat Fabiano Esposito. I stopped in the doorway, my breath catching. He wore only pajama pants and a white t-shirt, his feet bare, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his face that froze me in place. Tears tracked down his cheeks. Silent, glistening in the lamplight, falling unchecked as he stared at his sleeping daughter. I'd never seen him cry. Never imagined that a man who could kill without hesitation, who commanded an empire built on fear and violence, was capable of tears. But here they were, quiet, devastating, real. For a moment I considered retreating, giving him this private grief, this moment of vulnerability he'd never willingly show, but my feet carried me forward instead. "Fabiano," I whispered. He didn't startle, didn't wipe the tears away. He just turned his head slightly, acknowledging my presence without shame. "I woke you," he said, his voice rough. "I couldn't sleep." I moved closer, stopping a few feet from the chair. Is everything okay?" A sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "No, nothing is okay. Nothing has been okay since Valentina died." I'd never heard him speak her name with such raw pain. "Sometimes," he continued, his gaze returning to Augusta. I sit here and I wonder what kind of father I am. What kind of man? I've killed people, Oliveira. Dozens of them. Some who deserved it, some who were just in the way. I've built everything I have on blood and fear. You've also protected people, I said softly. You've kept your family safe. Have I? His hands gripped the arms of the chair. Valentina is dead. Augusta was nearly killed twice. The man I trusted most betrayed me for money. The tears continued to fall. What kind of protector fails so completely? I knelt beside the chair, close enough to see the anguish etched into every line of his face. The kind who's still trying, I said. The kind who crashes through windows, who sits in a nursery at 2 a.m. making sure his daughter is breathing, who hired a homeless girl with no qualifications because she was the only person who cared enough to pick up a crying baby in the rain. He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and the intensity of his gaze made my heart stutter. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "After Rico, after you knew how dangerous this world is, why didn't you run?" I could have lied, should have lied, but something about this moment, the darkness, the tears, the raw honesty, demanded truth. "Because she needs me," I said, gesturing to Augusta. "And because I think you do too." The silence stretched between us, heavy with things neither of us knew how to say. Then Esposito did something I never expected. He reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle. He held my hand like it was something precious, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "I never thanked you properly," he said. "For that night in the rain, for seeing a child instead of a name, for being brave when everyone else was afraid. You did thank me, several times, with words, not with this." He lifted my hand and pressed it against his chest, where I could feel his heart beating, strong, steady, alive. "You gave me back my reason for living, Oliveira. How do you thank someone for that?" My throat tightened. "You don't need to, I do. Because somewhere in these past weeks, you've become more than Augusta's nanny, more than the girl I offered protection to." His eyes searched mine. "You've become the person I listen for in the morning, the voice that makes this house feel less like a mausoleum and more like a home. The reason I started believing that maybe, despite everything I've done and everything I am, I might deserve a second chance at something good." "Fabiano, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I have no right to ask. You're here for Augusta, and I'll never compromise that. But I needed you to know that you matter. To her. To this house." He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "To me." A tear slipped down my own cheek. I didn't know when I'd started crying. "You matter to me too," I admitted. "You and Augusta both. You've given me something I never had, a purpose, a place, a reason to stop just surviving and start living." His free hand came up, catching my tear with his thumb. "Then stay," he said. "Not because of debt or obligation, but because you choose to. Because this—" He gestured to the nursery, to Augusta sleeping peacefully, to the two of us kneeling in lamplight. "Feels right to you, too." I looked at him. This man of violence and teaserness, of darkness and desperate love. This man who'd claimed my life and somehow, impossibly given me one worth living. "I'll stay," I whispered. Relief flooded his face. He pressed his forehead to our joined hands, his shoulders shaking with emotion he'd held back too long. We stayed like that, kneeling together beside Augusta's crib while the night deepened around us. Two broken people who'd found each other in the rain and the blood and the fear. Eventually, Augusta stirred, making soft sounds. I stood to check on her, but Esposito rose with me. "Let me," he said. He lifted his daughter with infinite care, cradling her against his chest. She settled immediately, her tiny hand gripping his shirt, her head tucked under his chin. In that moment, watching him sway gently with her, humming something low and Italian, I understood something profound. The most feared man in Naples was just a father trying not to fail his child. And I was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home. As dawn broke over the villa, painting the sea in shades of gold and rose, I stood at the window with Esposito beside me, Augusta sleeping between us. "No one cared about my crying child," he said quietly, echoing my own thoughts from that night in the rain. "Until you did." "And now?" I asked. He turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, he smiled. Real, genuine, unguarded. "Now I can't imagine my world without either of you in it." The golden cage had finally become what it had always wanted to be. Not a prison, but a home.